Good.
Recording started.
Okay.
Leslie, hello. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Um, Before jumping on this call, we were talking about morning routines and stuff. So what did you do this morning to start the day?
Okay, well, I said when we were chatting about it, I said I was working on the habit. This morning, I literally got up and made coffee. So that's pretty much it. Um, I've been trying to develop the habit of going on like a short walk to sort of like mindfully set up my day. I feel like I'm not a morning person. So when I've tried to like force myself into like, oh, like a workout right away or like jump into work, I'm so grouchy and the whole rest of the day I'm just like this angry person. So I'm trying to like take it a little slower in the morning. Yeah.
I am a morning person, but I need the ramp up.
Right.
I need the like if I move my body a little bit and then get my thoughts out somehow, then I'm annoying. I'm very annoying in the morning. And that
Okay.
means I am awake.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'm slowly getting to that annoying phase.
That's
Um,
amazing.
okay, so I sent you a bunch of questions and I said, if you could describe yourself in 3 songs, because we can do the professional intro thing, which we can
Okay.
do, but like 3 songs or movies or books or a combo
Nice.
platter, how would, what songs would you use and why?
So I ended up going with, I feel like it's telling that you're thinking songs because you're like a music person. I went with movies and books. Lord of the Rings, books and movies, because they're like such a definitive part of my childhood. You know, when there's like one film series that you and your siblings like latch onto and that's like the rest of your lives. I think that's Lord of the Rings for me.
Wow.
Um, yeah. And then I guess To Concrete. It's like an anime film, I guess, by Studio 4C. It's I feel like it really changed my brain when I was a teenager when I watched it because it was just I'd never seen animation like that. I'd never seen layouts like that. It was so beautiful. So it really like made me think about like I want to do that. That was like what kind of inspired me to like get into layout and background design and stuff like that. And it's very melancholic. It was just such a weird film. I don't think I'd seen anything like it at that point. So to like it's very much a mood piece. Like it's all about like nostalgia and sadness. And I was like, I very much resonated with it. So that's another one. And then maybe like Treasure Planet. I think that was like people talk about their Disney princess movie, and I think that was my Disney princess movie. Because it's just about like, I don't know, coming of age and a weird space adventure. I think it's one of like Disney's least popular films, and I think that's also indicative of like my taste. Sometimes I like things and everyone's like, bad choice. But I really love that film.
So you're not purposely choosing the thing that everybody hates to just be different. You're just like, hey,
I thought it was popular. I thought it was really popular, but then I realized the more I like was like, oh, this is one of my favorite. People were like, it's weird. Like the CGI doesn't necessarily hold up. Like it's kind of bizarre. And I was like, I thought it was very popular.
it works
So
for
maybe
me.
that's just me, but
It works for me.
yeah.
So you in your teenage years, you were already thinking layout, like you were thinking in that cinematic language already?
Maybe I didn't have the word for layout. I knew I wanted to do like that kind of art, if that makes sense. Like I was like, I know somebody has to make the backgrounds for this. Like
Yeah.
somebody has, and I knew enough about animation at that time to be like, oh, that's a job.
Yeah.
And so in my head, I was like, I want to be the person who does that.
Okay.
It wasn't until like I did take there was like a little animation crash course actually at like a local college, and I had gone with some friends just because we could get out of school for like a couple days, but it was sort of like a, you know, test things out, see if this is the career for you kind of thing. And it actually like taught me a lot about just like the basics of like what kinds of jobs there are, and that was actually very helpful because it was I think my first intro into technical terminology, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I might have known at the time that like layout was a job, but
Yeah. That's cool. I had no idea. I just remember watching animation and just feeling so many feelings and just being like taken aback by all of these stimuli. Like it was
yeah.
like the music and the imagery and the acting. I was like, what's happening? I just and I couldn't explain it all until I was older. So it's actually it's cool, like our different ways that we connect with this medium, right? So I'd love to hear like your path into it. So like, yeah, what's been your journey?
My journey. I think, well, I was always interested in art. So like I was always like, you know, a drawing kid, an art kid. And I think I was trying to be practical about it, as practical as like a teenager choosing their life journey can be. I was like, I knew I wanted to make money, but so I was like, oh, I don't know if fine arts is for me because you have to struggle, and everyone talks about the starving artist. So I was like, well, animation like is a real job. You get benefits. And in my head, like being practical meant like, does the job have benefits and will I be like employed right away? So for me, I was like, yeah, that has job opportunities. But I think it was also more than that. It was very much like, I love movement and music. And even though I'm not a musician person, like I still love listening to music. And storytelling. So like all of those things combined, like you're saying, just that fusion. I was like, I know that that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
I just don't know if I had fully articulated it in my head, like that was the career path I wanted. But when I was like trying to figure that out towards the end of high school, I was like, that's a real job. Let's just go with it. At the time, I also like was the recipient of a scholarship in Canada. So I don't actually think it's officially under the name that it was at the time,
Mm.
but it's like a national scholarship, and so it's sort of a holistic like broad strokes thing where they look at like volunteer criteria, blah blah blah, and like what your vision is for like what you want to do with the future. And so I got that scholarship, and it was like a full ride scholarship for
Mm.
all of college, which was amazing because I wouldn't have been able to afford it, and it would have been really difficult. And that opened up the doors for like where I could go, because at the time I was like community college or somewhere nearby, like what's possible.
Yeah.
And so that really like was like, okay, like across Canada, sky's the limit, where do you want to go? And that really changed things for me. And like even just the ability to like be a little bit like less in debt and like have that financial support to like go to school was huge. And I think I needed it. I know a lot of people say like I went to Sheridan, by the way, Sheridan
Yeah.
College in Ontario. A lot of people are like, oh, I don't know if like school is worth it or whatever, like for animation because it's an arts
Mm.
thing. And like, on the one hand, I'm like, I have seen and met so many people who never did like any traditional schooling for animation, and they're amazing artists. But for me, I think having that structure and guideline was really helpful because I think I'm a generalist. Like I like a lot of different things. So having like the structure and support where people were like, this is this job, like this is layout, this is background
Yeah.
paint, like, and being able to sort of like individually look at those things and decide like what am I resonating with, what am I talented at, what do I want to get better at. It helped me to direct my focus. Um, I wouldn't have been able to do that on my own. I would have just been like flailing around trying to learn everything. So for me, it was helpful. And the other thing I wanted to go to college for was to get a degree, because at the time I'd been told if you want to work in the US, you need like higher education. So I have a bachelor's in animation, which is never, I've never used. Like I've never been like, I have this. So I think it's a moot point. Like at the end of the day, it's like it helped me. It might help some people, but I don't think you need to go to school for animation if you're focused and dedicated.
Yeah.
But I did, and I found that it helped with my networking stuff because, like, obviously, I knew a lot of people in the graduating class. That's how I got my first job. Was we have like a grad show at the end of the year, and all the local studios come out. They check out people's work. So I got picked up from there.
Mhm.
Worked in animation, doing harmony rigged animation. If anyone knows what that is, for most TV productions, that's what they're using. So that's where I started out in Hamilton, Ontario. And then from there, I moved into layout because that's sort of like what I was thinking I would do. I just picked the first job that I could get paid.
Yeah.
So I like jumped into the first thing, and then I was like, okay, I want to move into layout because that's what I really wanted to do. And then from there, I got a job doing some art direction at this boutique studio in Toronto. And then I worked there for a while, and then I ended up taking on the role there as the director of animation production. It's like a boutique studio there, so it's fairly small, but they do some really beautiful work. It's like an Inuit-owned place, and they like focus on like cultural stories and stuff like that. Really unique art styles.
Mm.
I think the way I got into that job was just by being like, I want to do whatever you'll let me do. Like, I think in my previous jobs before that, I felt frustrated because of the I guess it's like you're kind of like a cog in the machine, right? Like you can't move up. You like if you have an idea for story and you're working in animation, you actually can't go back that far in the pipeline and be like, I have this great idea. No one's gonna listen to you, but also it's way too late in the process. And that
Yeah.
was so frustrating because like I had all these ideas and like these things I wanted to like pitch as like that I felt would like, improve the work. But obviously, like that's just not the right place to be to do that. So that was on my mind. I was really thinking like, how can I get involved earlier because I want to be like contributing. I want to make this better. And so I just started asking like, hey, is there anything else I can do to help? Like, can I work on these other things? How early can I get in on this? So I started bothering people, I guess. And then, yeah, and then I guess it worked out because I bothered people into giving me a job where I could have more input. I guess the weird thing about that particular job, this director of animation production, that was sort of every hat. So I was doing some direction, I was doing art direction, I was doing
Wow.
storyboarding and script editing and stuff like that. And it was really fun, but it was a lot of work. And the more I was in that position, the more I realized I was actually getting pulled away from the creative, like the storytelling and the
Yeah.
artwork, and more into the admin and like the nitty gritty of like how do you actually run a studio and like a team, you know. I really like
The
enjoyed
boss
it.
stuff.
Yeah,
The boss stuff. Yeah.
yeah. And it was like I really enjoyed it, and I felt like I was good at it. But at the same time, I was like, young Leslie did not, watch those films and decide to go into, you
Mm.
know, scheduling and budgeting. She wanted to do art. So I was like, I got to get back to like this. There was also a lot of inspiration in like the research that we were doing. Like we were doing so much like kind of deep dives into because specifically the storytelling we were doing was like specifically Inuit culture, and it's something where not a lot of it has been translated to animation, right? So like a lot of the stuff we were doing was firsts, and so we really needed to like get it right. So we were doing a ton of research, and it was so fun and so cool, and I think it made me really like ponder how much research and like how much like of this depth of knowledge did I have about like kind of my own history and background. Yeah, so I really was like, I want to get into that. Like that's something that I'm fascinated by. I learn best when I am putting everything on a project and like learning for the project. So I was like, I gotta write something and like put all this like do the same research that I'm doing here for myself. So that's sort of what I ended up doing. I moved away from that job, and then I started creating my own IP and developing my own projects and working in development, which is really like a fun shift, a terrifying fun shift. That's like here's something that's so stable and a lot of work, and then jumping into something where it's very self-directed and very much like
Mm.
let's see what the wind takes us, because it was very much like obviously relying on networking and who I knew, to just be like, hey, if you've got anything, like send it my way. I'm really like pushing into this new field. But it's been really fun and very rewarding. I think when I look at like my joy ratio to like depression ratio of like administration work versus like really hard work, but like that is creatively fulfilling, I would rather do this, even if it's possibly more painful. It's still like the joys are more joyful. Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know all of this about you. So this is so this is cool. I mean, I know you're multi-talented to the point of it being frustrating sometimes, right? Where it's like,
What do I
what,
do?
what do I do in this moment? But it actually sounds like in this chapter of your career, you've honed in on how you want to expend your energy. So it sounds like development's a priority for you, and finding a
Yeah.
way to tell your own stories is a priority for you. What are some other priorities right now?
Um, Priorities. I mean, definitely like storytelling as a whole. The development thing is
Yeah.
part of that, I guess, like, and I think one of the big things I've been learning is like, how do I find something tangible to share, right? It's one thing to be like, oh, I have these great soft skills at like asking the right questions or like pushing ideas forward. But it's another thing to be like, how do I share that I'm good at those things with other people? And
Yes.
so like to have a tangible work to be able to be like, I wrote this or like I storyboarded this. That's been my mission lately. And that's a priority for me right now is like, I want to create more tangibles to be able to like showcase what I do. Because I feel like I have a lot of soft skills that are just sort of like, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. They
Yeah,
need an application of some sort, or they just stay.
exactly.
They just
Yeah.
stay.
Well, especially post COVID, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I haven't worked in a studio since before COVID.
Yeah.
And it's kind of weird because I feel like a lot of my um, skill set comes out when I'm like working with teams in person. And so to be kind of on a screen and like separate from everybody else and where am I meeting people like over Zoom, it lacks kind of that personal touch. So it's been a huge shift where I really feel that pressure to be like, I want something where I can just like, check this out. This is me in a form that you can like watch or read.
That you can hold.
So yeah, it's happening slowly. We're
Yes.
working on it.
Yes. Okay, cool. So you like to work in teams and spaces because that's where you thrive. One of the giantest projects you worked on, Kizazi Motor Generation Fire.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about like how you got into that, what you did on it? And I actually kind of love how you navigated the different roles you played on it, because it sounds like you've been practicing this in your previous job. So please tell us that story a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely felt like, you know, like every step of your life, you're like, what am I doing? And then the next thing happens and you're like, oh, that was like prep for this next stage. That's very much how I felt. I got into it because Malcolm, who was the director, is also my romantic partner in real life. But we'd pitched something to Triggerfish was doing like the call out for pitches across the continent, and Malcolm had asked me if I would be willing to write with him. We'd never worked together professionally before. We'd like obviously talked story and we'd help each other like, you know, work through stuff in the story realm. But then he was like, oh, do you want to work like with me on this as a professional? So that was like new. And we were like, let's try it. Why not? So we wrote a bunch of stuff down. We pitched this thing. And it ended up being like just so similar in spirit to Panda's idea, which was amazing. Not the same thing, but like enough overlap that it would be weird if they both were done. Like it's just like how many like racing bikes and like shamans and all of this stuff. I was like, yeah, they're very similar. So we ended up combining forces, which was so great because Malcolm and Panda's like artistic styles and direction styles are so similar. So they were very much in sync. I feel like if they were not in sync, it would have been the worst time trying to like get people, but they were from the jump, like everything they were saying. It was just like a conversation of, yeah, but then more. Yeah, but then more. Like that was literally every conversation that they had. So it was really fun working with them. The way we sort of did things was I kind of came on as a writer and co-creator with Malcolm. And then in the way that we sort of shift with like the combining of projects, we went with Panda's idea. And so then my role was kind of shifted into being more of a writer for that idea. So what we would do is we just jump on calls and like talk for hours about sort of like what this world looked like, what the concept was. And then I'd basically take notes the whole time. My typing speed has improved drastically over the last couple of years. And every once in a while, I'll like you do the little online typing thing to see what my typing speed is. It's a secret source of pride, even if it's not that good. I'm just like, but I would just take like a ton of notes and then I'd go off by myself and kind of like shape it into like an outline or whatever. And then I'd come back and I'd pitch it to the guys. And it was kind of like this amalgamation process of like talking through a lot of stuff, play acting, like we do read throughs and just be like, that's not sounding right. Or like, what if we did this? A lot of like charades were involved. So it was really fun because it was a more like a loosey-goosey kind of like, let's just find the best way to get these ideas across. And at a certain point, we ended up doing some sort of like feel reels where we'd clip together like video clips of like stuff that we liked, music that we liked. So I spent a lot of time doing like that, like pulling together different clips and being like, okay, are we feeling this? Are we feeling this? Tonally, are we aiming for, you know, I don't know if I'm allowed to give like specific examples just because like I don't know if they're like,
well, the show's out, so
okay. Yeah, well, like, so we would just pull clips from, like, let's say, like, Speed Racer and, like, Red Line and, like, all of these different references just to be like, this is the feeling that we want. This is the level of craziness, or this is the level of, like, heartfelt conversation. Because it was hard to express, like, what did we want tonally when, like, we were going for such, like, opposite ends of the spectrum sometimes in terms of,
Yeah.
oh, like it's a really
Yes.
quiet moment with like mom and son to like, oh, and then they turn into battle robots in a different dimension. Like it was tough to sort of be like, yeah, in 10 minutes we're going to do all of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, pulling together sort of references and music and then cutting together feel reels that kind of encapsulated the arc of the story and the feeling. And then even boarding, I went into like some rough boards early on so that we could kind of test out some of the scenes, because a lot of it had to do with like music and looks and like some action. Like if they're racing and stuff, we wanted story beats in the races. And because it's such an action heavy short, we were like, how do we get all of this across? Like
Mm.
without, like we can't just write in the script like, and they race. Like we wanted to like really express the ups and downs of the journey.
And
So yeah,
that did increase your page count, just saying, but please continue.
yeah, getting it down to like the actual time limit was honestly such a nightmare. But yeah, I'm really glad that I got a chance to work on it. I feel like it was just such a fun time, a learning time, especially because it was all done over like Zoom, right? So it was like just kind of bizarre to sort of do everything. And we didn't even meet until like what,
Yeah.
2 years after we
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
been working together.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I mean, okay, so essentially you kind of transitioned from pitching creator role to like, I won't even say support, because like a writer is a creator. Like you're
Mhm.
expressing what the directors um are looking for, but you're using your skills and talents and your perspective to co-create with them and
Mhm.
tell a story. And then you're kind of skirting over this thing of you actually boarding. And what I want to talk about with that is like, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was just like, you are multi-skilled, and sometimes people feel like they have to be in a particular lane.
Mm.
But one of the joys of like animation is that oftentimes, you know, you're able to communicate using multiple things. So like you were able to write and you were also able to board and speak
Right.
that language, and then you also design as too. So they're like, oh wait, sound designer. So you were able to find a way to put together all the skills you have as a communication style, which for
Yeah.
very visual directors and very high stimulus directors,
Right.
super handy, right? And I mean, I know like on the producing side, working with Malcolm and Penda, I know the script phase was the least fun for them. But having someone who could like straddle, you know, I know they love story, they absolutely
Mhm.
do. But I think as people that are very visual
Yeah.
language people, I can see how words are just like let's just show you the stuff. So what I wanted to say about like how you move through these processes was I didn't know you. So um there's so many follow-ups I have for this, but I'll start with this one. Where it's like, okay, Leslie, okay, like who's she? So no context at all that you were Malcolm's partner or whatever. And then of course the person's okay, let's see some samples, and we look at your work and you're like, oh my God, she's actually amazing. And then you pitch and you're like, oh, she's actually amazing. And you're like, okay, great. Let her, you know, she can let her flourish, let her support you. But one thing I noticed about you as the thing went along was you were never afraid to put your hand up and go, hey, I'm interested in boarding. Hey, especially because we didn't know you. So
Right.
there was no way for us to be like, oh yeah, no, Leslie knows how to board. That's the obvious choice. You were bold. I don't know if it was courage or what, but I'd love to hear from your perspective, what it was like putting your hand up, especially you'd come from Canada, worked in a very specific space, then you're coming to be an ally and a co-creator in a very African.
Mm.
The intention of the series was always going to be that. It was the point was to amplify African voices, and you, with your incredible talents, did not dominate. You were just like, I'm here to support this vision. I'll use my talents to help amplify what they're trying to do. But these guys don't know me, and I can board too. So like, what was going through your mind every time you were kind of putting your hand up and going, hey, I'd like to.
Right. Well, then, it was really terrifying, I think, because like, I think I was very aware of the intention of the project, and I felt really uncomfortable from the jump on like, what is my role? How can I be involved? But I think like the thing that gave me grounds to sort of be like, I feel like I can speak up and ask for stuff is because like animation is such a team sport. Like everyone is involved. There's so many people involved, and like sometimes you can help make it better. And I don't think like that helping to make it better is going to detract from somebody else. Unless I was literally being like, I will be the board artist and rip this job away from somebody. That would be weird. But I don't think I think it sort of comes down to like, at no point did I feel like I was going to die over like a title. Like I wasn't going to be like, if I asked to board and they let me board, but then I don't get like some big credit or something, like to me, as long as like, I guess like the sort of thing I was operating on was like, how important is the credit to me and the recognition versus like making the thing better? And I don't think this is necessarily always the best course of option in terms of like career. But when it comes to something like this that had a very specific mandate, and also like I had a lot of conversation with Malcolm and Panda about this, it was more about like figuring out the best way to make the project better, getting and like figuring out what made sense in terms of professional credit to make sure that the project like hit its goals. I don't want to say that in a way that makes it sound like I'm like, oh, I did work and then I wasn't credited, but rather like, I just think sometimes people get too hung up on stuff like that. Like, it's like when I think about the most joy that I have as a creator, it's like making dumb plays with my siblings when I was like 8. Yeah, like it's like I think about times where it's been like free-spirited collaboration where you're like everyone is pushing to their utmost to like, you know, make cardboard props and bring in, you know, weird costumes and play dress up. Completely different scale to do that professionally now, but like there is sometimes a detriment to being like, if I don't get like the right pay or the right credit, I don't want to share my skills. And I think that's sort of like, who loses out here? The world loses out on something better, and you lose out on an opportunity to like do your best work. I believe in fair compensation, obviously, but like I feel like it's a conversation that has to like, you have to work that out within yourself to be like, what is fair compensation for me? Is that you know, certain things that the world tells me it is, or is that like something internal? I don't know. It's going to be different for everybody. But for me, I think I've been working through, especially when it comes to projects that have a specific mandate. I think I learned a lot during my time at that studio I worked at, because the mandate there was specifically to tell like Indigenous stories. That was a very like, I think, yeah, just a lot of learning happened for me during that time, because it's like, yeah, I think I was brought up to believe certain things about like what success looks like in the world, and like in the corporate world and whatever entertainment world, like that means credits, that means your name's on, and like sometimes it's just like, oh, that's just not it. Like, does that make me happier? Not necessarily. Does that make the work better? Not necessarily. So I don't know if that answers the question.
It does, and I just want to double click on a couple of things, like you know, you're saying you could see where you could make things better, and I know for a fact that you're not saying certain people didn't know what they were doing. You're not saying that at all, but you were like, hang on, I know my perspective or my style or my writing can help this moment read better. I'd like to lend my talent to helping articulate this thing. It's not about the credit, it's not about personal ambition. I just feel like my specific skill set can be really helpful in this moment. And just for the context of for people that maybe were not part of the process, as everybody knows, like many hands touch a project, and by the end of that project, sometimes the thing that you did at the beginning is 10% of what it was, and then it's 90% of other people's work, and so the credit evolves. So you know, if you're busy obsessing about like, I want to be credited as the story artist of this whole thing, for example, but then only 10% of your work remained, that's a conversation to have. On the fairness, I'm not saying that was your case, but I'm just like explaining that sometimes people bump with this stuff where they go, I mean, I've written on stuff like extensively, and my writing influenced something significantly, and I haven't received the credit for something. But I was in a similar position to you, where I was like, it was a conversation, so I kind of knew what I signed up for, and I think that's what you're saying too. Know why you're getting into it. You're making a personal contract with yourself, and then one with whoever you're working with. But I do think, Leslie, there are moments when it is important to have your work represented in a credit, because it is career defining. So even though a degree, your bachelor's in animation might not get you a gig, that credit might get you a gig.
Right. No, I totally agree. Just to put on your point too, I think one thing that I wanted to, that I was like keeping as a core thing during that process was just like, it doesn't really matter if my stuff gets used. So like, I think that's where I wanted to improve out. Like I was talking about like getting tangible work out there. I was like, of course I want to improve and I want to get my stuff out there. So being like, hey, can I try this out? Can I board something? It was still like a process of like the directors were very like specific about what they wanted. Like I knew from the jump, like if I sent something, if I submitted something and they hated it, they would tell me right up. They wouldn't like,
Oh,
they wouldn't be nice to me. They wouldn't be like, oh, but you're the writer. Oh, but you're, they would be like, no, it's garbage. Get this out of here if they didn't like it. So I didn't feel like they were the kind of people who would try to be polite and try to like soften anything, which is great. I don't think I would have been comfortable with that if someone was like, maybe I felt like they didn't have the wherewithal to tell me like to F off, right? Like,
yeah.
whereas with these guys, I was like, I feel very comfortable being like, let me put my best work forward. If you like it, can we use it? That kind of thing. And I felt confident that they would be like, it fits the vision or it does not.
Yeah. I hear that. I love it. And then, I mean, what's it like working with a partner? I have Tara, because my parents own a business together.
Okay.
And I watch them and I go, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're wonderful and everything like that. But I'm like, oh my gosh, like you, they do completely different things in the business. But I'm like, you know how it is with work colleagues. Sometimes you'll have a tough day and then like you'll bump. And then at home as well. And I'm just like, no, not doing that. And I have worked with people that I was seeing in the past and it's been fine. So what was that like for you? Would you do it again? Do you have any?
I would definitely, I definitely do it again. I love working with Malcolm. But it is like, I think Makuzi, since that was like our first professional run at things, it was definitely different than doing something like, you know, working on each other's projects in a personal setting versus like being like, okay, we'll both be on the same project on calls together, being professional. It was definitely difficult to sort of like figure out our footing, but I think we got the hang of like a lot of things. And I feel like we're both really confident about moving forward as like partners that can work together. I think the big thing we ended up like realizing is that like we cannot be co-creators of something. I think we like someone has to be the director, because then you can be like, because you know it's like too many chefs spoil the broth or something.
Totally. Yeah.
Like if you have even footing, for me at least for this partnership, we're both such creative forces and we have such different aesthetics and desires for story, for look, like everything. And I think that's really great because we complement each other and we can like see each other's blind spots. But that also means that if we're both like on even footing for like leading something, I think we're both head in different directions. So that can be really difficult. And ultimately, if we want to make something the best that it can be, I think one person must take a support role in a sense, in the best sense, like not even in like a lesser than, more like in a, how do I help this person that I love flourish in everything that they're talented at? And how do I use my gifts and talents to help them do an amazing job? And I feel like that's what we ended up with in this, and it was good. And I'm excited to sort of like, at some point, like we've been working on some stuff in the background, and I'm really excited for like the stuff that we've been working on to get to the point where we can work professionally again together.
That's very cool. Okay, so the hot tip is like be super clear on who's doing what. Because sometimes you can have competing perspectives, and
it's so relaxing to be like, I don't have to stress about this. Like it's not that I'm not being heard. I'm being heard and I'm being told this is not the way that we're going to go with the idea, or that yes, we're going to take that idea. It is relaxing as a like in a partner sense, but also in this to be like, okay, I have a very, very clear idea of like which vision we're pushing forward. And if it's not my vision, if it's like his vision, great. Like I'm like, it's a team player skill. Like, it's like, oh, are you able to like help the project in whatever ways it needs to be the best that it can be? And I think it's like an interesting process too at this stage of my life to sort of be able to like feel confident enough in myself that I don't feel like I'm being looked over. Because I think that's how I felt earlier in my career, was like, if people didn't listen, if they didn't take my ideas, one, the idea was terrible and I'm garbage, or two, like, oh, they don't respect me, they're not listening to me, all of these things. And I think I've like hit a point where I'm like much more chill about that. And it's so relieving to just be like, not everything is about me, not everything is about my ego. And like,
no, not everything about us.
So I feel really good about that part of my life right now, is like being able to like release that and be like, I don't need to be, you know, the center of all of the
of
decision
the
making and
universe.
stuff.
I mean, that point you're making would be a nice point to end this, but I've just got two more questions. One is, so I found out recently because we're doing something together that you're dyslexic. What in the world? And like, and you write and you were talking about this admin job you were doing. Talk to me about that. Like, how on earth are you so prolific? I don't even know what the question is, but
it's just because everything's digital, so you can spell check everything. I have I think it was a struggle when I was younger, like a lot more. I was homeschooled, so like even figuring out that was a real thing was like a whole ordeal. Because like for a while it was just like, oh, you're just being difficult, right? Like, oh, you're so like at a certain point you're like, oh wait, no, like there's an actual problem.
Something's happening.
Yeah. But I think it's been helpful to sort of be like, I can do everything that everybody else does. Like there's not it's not like a barrier in any way, other than just like maybe like taking a little bit of time when I know that it might be. And weirdly enough for me as an artist, and like it's more like with art projects where I'm like focusing on the visual side of things, I'll forget that I'm working with letters and I'll be like, oh, that's not at all a word that is real. Like the way that I do, like that happens every time I sit down to like like, oh, I'll do a handwritten birthday card. It's just garbage because I'll be focused on something else, I guess. But as far as like working in professional life, like spell check saves my ass, and like I think I've just developed enough. I don't know. I read a lot, and so I have workarounds. And if like I think because my parents were so focused on like reading comprehension when I was young, that really helps. Like at no point were they like, you get a pass on this. They were like, you must be reading at a certain level, and like it really encouraged me. And I think like I really loved reading when I was younger. I loved like the escapism and like all of that. So like I think it was a challenge. That, to be honest, I thought everybody was like that. So like it wasn't like I thought it was different. And also like I'm pretty sure like other siblings of mine also have the same. So like maybe this is a homeschooling issue just because like my sample size was so small. Whatever. Yeah.
Okay. That's cool. It's funny because I'm like, I also, because I like you said, I sing a little bit, and I just want everybody to sing. And I'm like, now I hear people like not being tuned. I'm like, what's wrong with you? Like,
oh my word. This is why you've never heard me sing. I love karaoke, but like, whoa, I am not a singer. And so you will be shocked.
Not anymore. I know now.
Okay, good.
So in terms of what you're busy with next, you said there's some stuff you're tinkering away with other people, and then you're writing. I know you're writing your own stuff. Yeah. What are you busy with now?
I am currently writing a book. It's like a middle grade novel. I think like, especially over the course of COVID and stuff, I was like, I really want something I can focus like my energy into as like a solo person. Like creating IP pitches and stuff is super fun, but like you still at the end of the day need a whole team and you need like financial stuff and all of that. So it loses its appeal when I get to a certain point just because you're waiting on other people. And so I kept thinking like, what can I do by myself that I can just keep working at and I don't have to stop doing? And I started doing some comic stuff. And even then I was like, oh my goodness, this is going to take a long time.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, how do I pare this down? How do I simplify? I was thinking about like, could I animate something by myself? Simplify. Could I comic by myself? Simplify. And ultimately at the end of the day, I was like, I am a writer. I love writing. I love reading. Why don't I do something truly alone and write a book? So I got into that and I started writing something and doing illustrations. So it's like a kind of combo thing. So less work than a graphic novel for sure, but still really fun. And I've just been really enjoying sort of like getting into, I feel like novel writing is very different than script writing and then like working in animation writing because you're not dealing with notes and stuff. You're not like changing what you're doing. You're literally writing from the heart and making something your own and then sending it off to the slaughterhouse to be torn apart.
Yeah, we looked at.
But at this point in the process, I'm just really enjoying being able to storytell completely for myself. And I keep like trying to remind myself like, yeah, just do it for you. Other people will rip it to shreds later, but that is not the time now. And it's been a very cathartic process, I think, just like especially after coming out of like a billion projects with like notes. It's just nice to be
I
like,
hear that. I hear that.
yeah.
And then Lizzie, like for people like you that do lots of things, that have lots of skills, what would you say, just from your own perspective, is a helpful way to find your own voice and your own path?
I think finding your own path is difficult because it's never going to seem like you're finding your own path. You're
Yeah.
just going to keep going out there. But I think like for me, one thing that has been very, very helpful has just been like being open to like putting myself out there and being like, maybe I fail. That's fine. Just go for it. Because like you've invited me to speak on panels and stuff before, and like to be like to do stuff like this where you're speaking, and like it always makes me nervous, but it's one of those things where it's like you never know until you do it, and it's honestly not that bad once you're doing it. And you'll only get better at it. You have to have kind of like your first little baby steps into the world of public speaking and in anything, any role, any job. I feel like getting really comfortable with the idea of telling people like, help, I need mentorship, I need whatever, like asking for what you need. I think like shifting that mindset, like talked earlier about having like those feelings of being like, oh, I like either I'm inadequate or I'm being like overlooked, being able to make peace with that and be like, actually, no, like I can be confident in the talents that I have. So like, and that I've worked on thus far. And I can ask for help for anything that I can't do. Like I'm a hard worker. Like that's just like a core value of mine. So it's not, I don't see a problem with like jumping into any career thing, any opportunity that comes my way, especially because I'm just able to be like, yeah, I know I'll need help. I don't know these things. Can I, partner with people to get that information? And like knowing that they're hiring you or that they're saying yes to you with that knowledge, they're not expecting you. If you tell them from the jump, like, oh, I don't know these things, but I will learn and I can learn, especially and I'm willing to work with people to learn those things. No one's going to be like, boo, you said you don't know something. We're not going to hire you for this thing. We're not going to like, ask you to do it. Like if they know that that's where you're coming from, I think most people are actually really excited and like to share what they know and to have you on board. So for me, I think finding my way forward has been a big series of being like, yeah, I'll say yes to it, even though I'm terrified. And like, I'll ask for help where I need it. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. And so what was the name of the short you worked on the anthology? Because you want people to watch it and to look out for your stuff.
Please watch Kazazimoto's Generation Fire. My episode is, I think, episode 2, Makuzi, the Spirit Racer. Yeah, I really like it.
Your own work. Where do we see your own personal stuff?
But I guess Instagram at Les Pulse, LESPULS on Instagram is probably the best place.
Yeah. Thank you. Looking forward to seeing more.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to finishing some stuff. Thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure. And I'm going to stop this recording now.
Nice.